So on this particular one, I mean, their title sounds a lot worse than it really is. I mean, it's not really a curse. I mean, in fact, what I want to speak about is the National Biodiversity Economy Strategy that is going to be put in place. And I'm really glad that Mr. Madiba is here, because hopefully he can address some of these concerns. And so going through the strategy, which was released by the department in mid-March for public consultation, aims, and I quote, to optimize biodiversity-based business potentials of ecological systems and to contribute to the economic growth with local benefication, job creation, poverty alleviation, and food security. You know, we've all heard about this today. It sounds great. The strategy aims to increase the conservation real estate from 20 million hectares to 34 million by 2040. And the involvement of impoverished communities is important. And this is definitely, I think, a step in the right direction. So it's looking good on paper so far, but it's in the detail that things start to not show themselves. In fact, I'm not seeing much detail at all. It's a bit of a curate's egg. It's kind of only good in parts. But I'm hoping, Mr. Madiba, you can address these things. So while the overall plan is in theory well-founded in accordance with the Global Biodiversity Framework, there are major sections of this strategy that have less to do about securing biodiversity and the benefit of the poor, and more about exploiting the natural environment for commercial gain that will only benefit a few. I seem like I'm repeating myself here. Historically, the human economic benefit from wildlife excluded the majority of South Africans, especially the rural communities, living alongside biodiverse hotspots, many of whom still have no security of tenure due to inequitable land ownership policies. And I really want to know how that's going to be transformed. I mean, I think that's a big job to do. And obviously I know it's in the text that one of the central pillars of this strategy is that it must be equitable, and that the government aims to address this problem is commendable. But this is the challenge, like I was saying. Promising biodiversity utilization as a means for economic upliftment for millions of impoverished rural South Africans, and we've discussed this already, I mean, there are a lot, when biodiversity is already under siege, is really unrealistic. And it can open the door to rampant exploitation and corruption. So again, how does one address this? And one of the things that is already that I'm worried about is based on a report on the state of provincial reserves in South Africa, and this was presented to the Portfolio Committee for the department in February this year, clearly indicated that numerous South African protected areas are unable to fulfill their conservation objectives due to poor provincial management and lack of funding. And many of these reserves are in a state of collapse. Most reserves still are unable to meet their conservation objectives, let alone deliver benefits to surrounding communities. So for the strategy to work, government needs to first iron out these significant problems. I'm going to give you an example, and here's the old chestnut again. Sectors of the wildlife community economy in this country remain untransformed, and I'm going to give an example of trophy hunting. Only 4% of the registered professional hunters are categorized as previously disadvantaged. And this is according to an answer to a parliamentary question in 2022 by Barbara Creasy. So, you know, again, how are we going to transform that? I mean, what is the strategy in place? What's the detail? And since we're on trophy hunting, and since I love the topic so much, and that I'm really warming to you guys, central to the success of this strategy is trophy hunting and game ranching, as we heard this morning, for the meat industry. But currently, almost all trophy hunting and game ranching takes place on private land owned by wealthy landowners. Surrounding these farms, many communities still live in abject poverty. A study has shown, and we haven't spoken about this, and this is an interesting one, is that in some cases, farm laborers who have traditionally lived and worked on the land when it was agricultural have been removed and are now without access to meaningful employment after the transition to a game farm. And that's an interesting study to have a look at, and this is something that also needs to be addressed. Goal 2 of the strategy's intention is to increase the GDP contribution for consumptive use of game from extensive wildlife systems from 4.6 billion, which is a figure in 2020, to 27.6 billion by 2036. But there's, again, no clear explanation of how this will be achieved. Trophy hunting is touted as a way to do that, and herein is a little bit of a problem. In 2022, which is the latest figures available, around 6,000 international hunters shot more than 36,500 wild animals. This is according to the department's professional hunting stats. Now, if you're going to increase this, it'll have to be underpinned by both an increase in hunters and their prey, so that by 2036, more than 16,500 international hunters will be required to shoot almost 100,000 animals annually. I mean, that's 1 million animals in a 10-year period, which will include more than 10,000 lions, 1,300 elephants, 3,000 white rhino, 30,000 buffalo. Quite frankly, it doesn't seem plausible that these increased numbers of animals will suddenly materialize in extensive wildlife systems, nor that there's an international demand for hunters. Now, I mean, some of you might disagree with me there, but I'm looking at some of the stats that say that maybe trophy hunting is in a state of decline, and I've spoken to some hunters here, and some tend to agree. So foreign hunters coming to South Africa have declined by 62.4% in the last 14 years. The number of hunters in countries that provide trophy hunters to Africa have dropped significantly. There's a decline from the US of 18.5% between 91 and 2016, and in France a drop of 50% in the last 40 years. So again, how are we going to just make these hunters come? How are we going to increase the number in order to meet those goals? Okay. Another confusing aspect of the strategy is its plan to stimulate the domestic market in rhino horn and ivory. For example, to administer, for health clinics to administer traditional remedies using rhino horn for tourists from the Far East. I'm not sure, Mike, you probably can better at this, but I'm not sure that demand exists so much anymore. Or ivory carving. Now, this is quite interesting because, you know, we're talking about a local market. There is no international market. And the strategy says maybe the international market will become favorable. But with the current bans at CITES with rhino horn and ivory, I mean, that seems unlikely. Marco already mentioned yesterday that it takes a 2/3 majority to change that. And again, Mike Dillis, you probably, I mean, it's probably unlikely that these things are going to change. So basically, these are the questions. I mean, there are many, many more, and I've run out of time. So, you know, these are the questions that we need to ask: is how is this biodiversity economy strategy going to work in detail? In principle, it's great, but in detail, how are we going to do that? And I think I will leave it there.